Good evening and welcome. My name is Hank Clark. I'm Program Director of the Political Economy Project, and it's a pleasure to see all of you for the PEP's next to last public event of winter 2021. Couple of very brief program notes. First, our final speaker for winter will be Corey Smith. He's our postdoctoral fellow in economics, who'll be giving a talk next week on the subject of the development of the American West. He'll be speaking from Pakistan, so that event will take place at 12:30 p.m. on Tuesday, March the 2nd, and you can find more information about it on our website. Also, those of you students who are still deciding on spring term courses may have overlooked Danny Steinmetz Jenkins' really interesting looking course on liberalism from World War II to the present. This is a PEP sponsored course, never taught before, but it is offered through the history department, 90.10, which is why you might have overlooked it. You can check out their website for more information. I've looked at the syllabus for this course. It looks like a wonderful course. I would love to be able to take it myself. Well, our speaker this evening certainly needs no introduction. Meir Kohn helped to found the Political Economy Project some years ago. He is professor of economics here at Dartmouth, where he teaches some legendary courses, shall we say. He has also offered numerous public talks for the PEP, as well as countless informal reading groups or book groups over the years, which have also, in their way, become legendary. So we're delighted to have him with us. Now, the format for today's event will be very simple. Professor Kohn will speak for a while, and if you have questions as he goes along, please click on the Raise Hands tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen so that we can keep track. I'll try and call on a few students to begin, but all of you who are present are welcome to participate, and we'll take as many questions as we have time for. Without further ado, Meir, thanks very much for being with us this evening, and the floor is all yours, sir.
Okay, so welcome. Thank you all for coming or attending. I'm looking forward to your questions. I'm going to try and speak for something like half an hour. I may miss that by a bit, but that's sort of what I would like to do. Okay. So why is there no such thing as market failure? So the standard justification for government intervention is market failure. This talk is not going to be about government intervention and whether it's justified. It's going to be about the concept or idea of market failure. And I will argue that the concept of market failure makes no sense. It doesn't correspond to anything in the real world, okay? I should say, ditto the concept of market success. Those of you who've taken economics know about efficiency and optimality. That doesn't shape up very well either. So it's this whole idea of optimal, not optimal. And in particular, I'm not saying that government intervention is never justified, but as many of you will know, I'm not a fan. Just that market failure is not a valid argument for government intervention. So it is an example of a logical fallacy known as mistaking the map for the territory, okay? So market failure is not an observed property of real world economies. No one has actually seen or observed or recorded or has data on market failure, okay? Market failure is a property of a mathematical model of an economy, okay? And this model and any model is an analog of the reality it represents, okay? And some properties of the model correspond to the properties of reality. Other properties do not. So in using a model, okay, we need the price of modeling is eternal vigilance, okay? So you need to be careful in drawing conclusions from the properties of the model. Are these properties that carry over? Are they not, okay? And getting it wrong is called mistaking the map for the territory. Here, the map is the model, the territory is the reality that it represents, okay? So some properties of the map correspond, others don't. So let me give you an example. As a kid growing up in England in the 1950s, we learned about the empire, which was still pretty much intact. And we'd look at a map of the world, and the empire would be colored pink, okay? You could learn various things from the map, okay? For example, the empire was a large chunk of the world. That was true on the map, and it was also true in the world, okay? What you couldn't learn is that Australia, Ghana, and Malaya were colored pink, okay? That was a property of the map, not a property of reality, okay? So a less silly example, the common map of the world that we use is called the Mercator projection, okay? And the Mercator projection makes Greenland look larger than Africa. Okay, so a common map of the world, if you look at it, Greenland looks bigger than Africa. Actually, Africa is 14 times larger than Greenland, okay? So this way of drawing a map is very good for direction, north, south, east, west, okay? You can trust it on that. It gives a very good idea of shape, but it's useless for size and distance, okay? So it's good for what it does. It shouldn't be used for what it doesn't do, okay? And the same is true for our model of the economy. All right, so let's talk about that model of the economy. To understand it, let's start with Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, okay? I have to watch out here. Hank will be fact-checking on what I have to say, okay? So the big idea of the Wealth of Nations was the secret of productivity of human societies was not how smart or skillful we are as individuals, but how we work together, the social organization of production, okay? So what is special about how humans work together versus other social animals often work together, but we do it in a strange way, okay, through what Smith called the propensity to truck and barter, trading with one another. That's uniquely human. I generally don't like things, you know, people saying this is uniquely human because it usually isn't, but this has been really researched. No other animal does this, okay? The structure in which this trading or exchange take place is the market. And because the market exists, rather than each family producing for itself and maybe trading a little bit with its neighbors, we produce for the market, for exchange. We sell what we produce and we use the proceeds to buy what we need, okay? And the consequence of this is a division of labor, specialization, the development of skills, the application of technology, and the result is an enormous increase in productivity. That is the origin of the Wealth of Nations, okay? However, this kind of very decentralized social organization requires coordination. And Smith was struck that prices played a role in this coordination, okay? So prices coordinate the social organization on which the Wealth of Nations depends, okay? And textbook economics, the economics you learn in the classroom, focuses on this idea, okay? Micro, as it's called. How prices coordinate the social organization of production. And to understand how it works, economists built a mathematical model of an economy, okay? So alarm bells should go off, okay? We're gonna be using a model. We've got to be careful how we use this, okay? The legitimate use of the model, what it was designed for, is how prices coordinate social organization of production. What are the things that affect prices? What are the interactions between different markets? And the advantage, it's claimed, I'm not sure it's true, over Smith's treatment of this is that this, because it uses a mathematical model, it's sort of logically sound and there's some clarification of the ideas that Smith put forward, okay? So that all works, okay? So I'm not sure how much it improves on Smith, but let's say that it does. But that's what it was designed for, and it does that reasonably well, okay? But then textbook economics jumps the shark, okay? It asks under what conditions an economy coordinated in this way by prices achieves the highest possible productivity, efficiency, optimality, what I described as market success, okay? When the conditions are such that coordination by prices does not achieve efficiency, optimality, then we call that market failure. So that's what we mean by market failure. The conditions are such that in this model, okay, where everything is coordinated by prices, we do not get the most efficient allocation of resources, efficient organization of production, okay? So this makes perfectly good sense in the model, but I'm going to argue that it doesn't make sense in the real world, and it's very much an example of mistaking the map for the territory. To understand why, we need to see how the model differs from the real world, how the map differs from the territory, okay? So the model makes several simplifying assumptions, okay? This is perfectly normal when you're constructing a model, okay? It's not going to be a literal description of the thing you're modeling, okay? It's going to stress some things, downplay other things, and the simplifying assumptions, that's the things that we're kind of leaving out, really, okay? Okay, so I'm going to focus on two of those simplifying assumptions, and there's others that are important. One is individuals. How do individuals behave, okay, in the model? Okay, what do we assume about individual behavior? And what the model assumes is that individuals are essentially passive, okay? They receive information on prices, and according to the prices they receive, they decide, they form a plan of what to produce and what to consume. That's it. Okay? They don't do anything else, okay? They just respond to prices in their decisions to produce and consume, okay? We'll see in a little while what that misses out and why that matters to the question of market failure. Then the second thing is, what is the market in this model, okay? And the market is essentially a disembodied spirit, okay? There's no description in the model of a market, okay? What it does, how it works, how it derives the prices. But miraculously, it derives the prices that everybody reacts to, okay? There are other simplifying assumptions. One of them is that the economy is in a state of equilibrium, okay? So all of these things are not realistic, okay? Individuals do lots of other things than responding to prices. The market is not a disembodied spirit. And don't plan to talk about this, but the economy is not in equilibrium. It's constantly changing in ways that are essentially unpredictable, okay? But even if these assumptions are not literally true, and that's what we mean by simplifying assumptions, they may not do any harm, and they may make it possible to create a simple mathematical model that we can use to ask questions about prices, okay? So what is missing? What is assumed away? So in reality, individuals are highly social. They interact with one another. Someone has described this model as sort of autistic economics, okay? There's no eye contact between individuals, okay? They just respond to prices. In reality, they get together, do things, coordinate directly, not just through prices. The market in the real economy is a major economic activity, sometimes called, I call it commerce. Okay, people buying and selling things and trying to make a profit from doing that. Okay, mediation of exchange, buying and reselling for profit. It's actually a bigger part of the economy than production in today's US economy. A lot of people make their living from this. Okay. Okay. So next, does it matter that these things are missing? So it depends on what question we ask, as with a map. Okay. If the question is how prices affect the economy, what affects prices, that's fine. That's what the model was designed for. And these simplifications don't leave out anything of critical importance. They give us a pretty good answer to those questions. If we're talking about market failure, not so much. Okay. So market failure is when coordination by prices does not produce the highest possible productivity. So let's look at it, let's make it a bit less abstract and look at a couple of conditions that can cause market failure. So one of them is imperfect information. Okay. We assume in the model that that individuals have all the information they need to make their decision on how they should respond to prices. Okay, there's no uncertainty about product quality. There's no uncertainty about the reliability of people they trade with. All this is perfectly known. Okay, although if there are problems with those things, that would be market failure, and the economy would not achieve full potential efficiency. Okay. Another example of market failure is public goods. Okay, so some goods that are that are non-excludable or non-rival or both. Non-excludable is like something where, yeah, national defense is sort of an example, okay? Or policing is an example. Okay, if we're policing to reduce crime, not just the people that pay for it benefit from it. Okay, you don't have to pay for it to benefit. You can't really exclude people. We can't say only people who paid their taxes are protected by the police. Okay, it's not practical to do something like that. Okay, non-rival, don't want to go into it. But there are conditions that certain kinds of goods are just defined as public goods, or it can be described as public goods. And for the model, okay, goods like that will not be provided. Okay, people won't be able to make a profit providing those goods, so they won't be provided. Okay, so both imperfect information and public goods are problems in the model, examples of market failure in the model. How about in the real world? Okay, in the model, social organization of production is coordinated only by prices. In the real world, it's coordinated by prices, but not only by prices. In particular, it's coordinated through direct interaction among individuals, among people, okay? Direct interaction can lead to joint action, which can provide the public good, okay? So if you lived somewhere and there was no police force and no government, people could get together and form an association and collect money to hire a couple of policemen to provide policing. Okay, perfectly, perfectly reasonable, could easily be done. Okay, and it is done. I mean, there are sort of gated communities which essentially do that. Okay. Okay. So the information problem, imperfect information, is something that typically commerce addresses. It's part of what commerce does is to make it possible for people to trade with one another. So if information is a problem, commerce will find ways to deal with that problem. So let's look at an example. Let's illustrate that with an example, okay? And the example is finance, okay? The subject of Economics 26. I don't know who's watching this, but I imagine that quite a few of you will have taken Economics 26, okay? So let's do an experiment. Let's do finance as it's done in the model, okay, and finance as it's done in the real world, okay? So in the model version of finance, there are individual savers, people who want to save and are willing to lend, and there are individual investors, people who want to borrow, okay? And they are coordinated by interest rates. So the market provides interest rates, and at those interest rates, everybody decides how much they want to lend and borrow. Everything just works fine like that. Under certain conditions, conceivably, that could work. But in reality, there are lots of problems that need to be solved, okay? Information being an important one, okay? So back in the real world, okay, borrowing and lending is not coordinated only by interest rates. That's sort of the idea of the model. Prices do the coordination. In the real world, borrowing and lending, okay, need a lot of help. There are lots and lots of problems. People finding one another, people not knowing one another, people not being, what do we do if so-and-so doesn't pay? All of these things need to be dealt with, okay? And in the real world, it's coordinated by the financial system, okay? That's a particular branch of commerce that mediates borrowing and lending, okay? Particular kind of exchange. And it consists of financial institutions, banks, security firms, venture capitalists, organized financial markets for stocks and bonds and derivatives. And all of this activity together takes up almost 10% of the economy. It's pretty big, okay? And the financial system makes its living by facilitating financing, okay? By addressing all of the problems, making financing easier and making financing cheaper. So the value that the financial system adds to the economy is greater than its cost by a lot, okay? So this problem of market failure in the real world, in this case, is not a problem, okay? It's a fact of life, but commerce takes care of it. The financial system takes care of it. But this solution is ruled out by assumption in the model, okay? All the things that deal with this problem are ruled out by assumption, okay? So using the model to understand the consequence of imperfect information makes no sense. So it's like using the map to compare the size of Greenland and Africa. It's something the model doesn't do, okay? We're outside the legitimate scope of the model. Similarly with other examples of market failure, public goods, externalities, all of those things. So those are problems that by assumption in the model have no solution. In the real world, there are solutions to all of those problems, okay? So let me come to my conclusion. Okay, this is going, in terms of time, this is going well. So market failure is a property of a particular mathematical model of the economy. In the model, coordination is by prices only. Under some conditions, this is not enough for the best outcome. And I said best is a bit problematic as well, okay? This situation is called market failure. In the model, the problem can be solved only by the intervention of government. So what is government in the model, okay? In the model, government is another disembodied spirit, just like the market. And this one is like a fairy godmother, okay? So if there's any problem, the fairy godmother solves it, okay? Government solves it. That's all we know about government. We don't look at what government is and how it works and da, da, da. In reality, like commerce, it's a big chunk of the economy. A lot of people work there and make their living, but we don't talk about that. Okay. So that's the story in the model. Okay. If prices don't do it, then government does it. Okay. In the real world, there are additional means of coordination, joint action, and commerce in particular. And the model, those just assumed away, don't exist. So market failure in the real world is bogus. Okay, it's an example of mistaking the map for the territory. Okay, it's a real problem on the map, but not in the territory. But this bogus argument is used to justify actual government intervention in the real world. Okay, you have your economic advisors saying, oh yes, science is a public good, the government should fund it. Really? Under conditions that result in market failure in the mathematical model, we need government to intervene in the real world. This is a non sequitur. Okay, this really doesn't follow. That is, when coordination by prices alone not enough in the model, in the real world, we need coordination by force, by guys with guns. Okay, that makes sense. But don't worry, it will all be done under the wise guidance of highly credentialed experts who have our best interests at heart. Trust them. Okay, thank you. That's I actually made it in half an hour. Very good. Over to you, Hank.
Thanks very much, Meir, for a characteristically engaging, interesting, and provocative talk. The floor is now open for any of you who may have questions for Meir Kohn. Please use the raise hand feature on your Zoom monitor. And I see Itish Goel first up. And Itish, you're up. What is your question, sir?
Yeah, hi, Professor Kohn. My question was, can't a case be made that this whole idea of market failures actually limits government intervention to only the cases where we come to the conclusion, or the models come to the conclusion, that there has been a market failure? I wrote in historically in countries where we've followed the model, the role of the government has been limited to, say, science, and not in producing bread, where we've come to the conclusion, or the models come to the conclusion, that there is no market failure, ergo there is no need for government intervention.
Oh, so you're basically saying there's a silver lining. Okay, so you're saying if we accept this idea that market failure justifies government intervention, then we won't get other kinds of government intervention. Actually, it doesn't follow. You may have other arguments for government intervention. Okay, so those other kinds of intervention, they may have their own justifications. I mean, typically there's the desire to intervene, and then we rationalize it. Okay, sometimes with market failure, sometimes with other things. Okay.
Other questions? James Chartouni, you're up, sir.
Hi, James.
Hi, Professor. Could you elaborate on what is the role of the entrepreneur in these supposed market failures, and either ameliorating or resolving them?
I mean, entrepreneurship is a big element of commerce. Okay, so a lot of what commerce does requires entrepreneurship, but you could say seeing that something is a problem and figuring out a way to deal with it is a very entrepreneurial thing to do. So in setting up this financial system, I'm sure there was a lot of entrepreneurship, and there are constantly new ideas for ways on improving with things, new types of financial institution, SPACs, for example. I mean, yeah, there's definitely, I mean, there's a whole story about how commerce works, and entrepreneurship plays a big role in that. and even like public goods. I mean, it's setting up, organizing the joint action to provide a public good where it's not, otherwise provided. That's another example of entrepreneurship. Okay, yeah, so definitely. And actually, you say the world is constantly changing, right? So what we've set up to deal with problems, even if it's good, there are new problems propping up, new opportunities propping up, and that's what entrepreneurs do. They see that, oh, there's something we can do here, maybe turn a buck as well. Yeah.
Thank you, James. Other questions for Professor Kohn? Josh, you're up next.
Hi, Professor. Can you hear me?
Hi, Josh. Yeah, I can hear you.
So this was great. I wanted to sort of bring it back to the real world again, in terms of something that would traditionally be considered market failure, maybe would be, for example, what happened this past week in Texas with the complications with the power grid and stuff. And as I best understand it, the difficulty was there was no sort of what we might describe as incentive for these private energy suppliers to develop the necessary protections for extreme weather events that were just statistically very unlikely to happen. And so in situations like this, is this the type of situation where one could argue it's best for government intervention, or is there a market solution for this?
I guess we're talking about is there an argument for government intervention in a situation? I said this isn't really something I'm addressing, but looking at your example, this is an energy system molded by the government. Okay, this is, it's a bit rich to blame this on the private sector. Okay, so energy in Texas, all the renewable stuff, all the incentives really against investing in precautions. It's something created by government. So I don't see this as an argument for more government intervention. I would see it as an argument for less government intervention in this particular case. Yeah, California is another great example of an energy system molded by the government, and similarly not terribly successful.
Alan, you're next.
In your ideal world,
Yes.
How would science be funded? And also another question, if climate change is an issue that ought to be addressed, how ought it be addressed without massive government intervention? Okay.
You're asking me a lot of difficult questions, but what was the first one? I slipped.
How would science be
science funding? Yeah, I'm actually going to a conference on this subject where I'm going to give a version of this talk. The interesting thing about science funding is before World War II, the government never funded. There was virtually no funding of science by governments. Okay, it's really a World War II phenomenon in the United States and in free market countries. In the Soviet Union, is maybe a different story. Science was doing pretty well. Okay, and even in World War II, really government funding of science was very sort of narrowly directed to arms-related science. Okay, so which makes some sense. Okay, if you're the big customer for armaments and you want to get the job done reasonably quickly, providing financial incentives to get things done seems perfectly reasonable. Okay, so the idea that science should be actually what happened was after World War II, the big science establishment that was government funded and created by the government during the war, the guy running that was really worried that it would just disappear. So he asked some economists to write up some arguments for why the government should continue to fund this. And they did, and they brought in market failure. Okay, science is a public good, should be funded by government. Hasn't been a success. Government funding of science changes a lot of the incentives, a lot of the ways that science is done. Today, science works well where there are strong private incentives. Okay, where it's purely funded by government, the results are very disappointing. Okay, there's sort of generally recognized kind of a deterioration of science. Okay, there's more and more spent, but we don't seem to be getting the kind of breakthroughs that we used to, except actually in things that are related to medicine. Okay, biology, virology will now be doing rather well. Those sorts of things. So there really isn't, the idea is, if the government, I mean, the idea is government of funding of science is sort of neutral. It doesn't affect the way science is done. It's not true. It makes a big difference. It becomes very bureaucratic. Okay. And what you have to get your project approved by a government committee. Okay. And that tends to give you very low risk, low return projects. So there's a lot of bad incentives. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Eric, you're next on the list. Eric.
Hey there, Dr. Kohn. So your discussion of geographic data had me thinking, it's composed of spatial and attribute data, and kind of likewise, a lot of these economic models focus a lot upon the price and the decision making. But how does your discussion kind of account for the question of values? Like conservation might not be the most economically efficient scenario, but there's values that are reflected in the public that people wish to see expressed.
Sure, certainly. Again, historically, the big source of finance for that sort of thing, and actually for science as well, was philanthropy. Okay, that's what rich people did to look good. Okay, the Rockefellers set up all kinds of national parks before the government did. Okay, and that was sort of a standard way of doing things. So we have lots of billionaires. Okay, they probably pay a lot more taxes today than they would have done in the 1930s, say, when they were funding all these things. So taking their money away, the government taking away a chunk of their money and then using it to finance these things that we think are really, are valuable and should be supported, doesn't work well. It was actually better when it was funded philanthropically.
Oh, but sorry to butt in, but like, what about when the values of those philanthropists don't reflect the values of other people? Because in the time of the Rockefellers and whatnot, there was also like child labor. Would market forces have corrected for that without the values of?
We're getting into a whole load of issues. Okay, so the child labor issue, there was actually someone who came to Dartmouth, a friend of mine, gave a talk on sweatshops, okay, evil sweatshops, and how sweatshops are just enormous benefit to the people working there, that this is a terrific opportunity for them. Okay, so the world is sort of a hard place, and you should ask, okay, what are the alternatives? What alternatives do people have? So the women working in sweatshops otherwise would be bent over in the rice fields, making much less. It doesn't look nice to you, but it's kind of elitist to say that these people shouldn't have an opportunity to better their situation as they see it, because it doesn't look nice to you. So child labor, okay, so child labor, a lot of it was teenage labor, okay? And it wasn't abolished because it was just awful and the kids suffered. It was abolished because the labor unions didn't want that competition for their members. That's when child labor was abolished, under political pressure from labor unions. And so now you have kids sitting in high school to age 18 who have zero interest in what they're doing, really fed up and bored to tears, acting out, being really miserable. Whereas if we let them take a job, they would be much better off, and so would we. So, I mean, there's lots of things, cases we can talk about, and I'm not, as I said at the beginning, this isn't about government intervention, but I'm not a fan. But that's what you want to talk about. I'm happy to respond. Yes, Hank, go ahead.
Yes, we have a question from the audience wondering if you had any thoughts about the GameStop situation, and would that be an example of market failure of some sort? So
we have to differentiate between market failure as formally understood and the idea that there's something wrong with what's happening in the market. That's not the same thing. So you could say the GameStop phenomenon was not, could have been sort of an aberration, a pathology of financial markets, not unknown, similar things that happened plenty of times before. Would government intervention to prevent that be a good thing? I doubt it. I doubt it. Okay, the world is not a perfect place, but the question is, it's like medicine. First, do no harm. Is it better to suffer the occasional GameStop, or is it better to have the heavy hand of the government regulating more regulation of financial markets? I don't think so. So this is a little bit, this market failure thing, and what we're talking about is kind of this quest for perfection, okay, for solutions. And Tom Sowell, one of my favorite economists, one of his big sayings is, there are no solutions, there are just trade-offs. So if you, for example, government funding of science, okay, so if government funds science, we'll get more science, okay, but it won't be very good science. Is that a good trade-off? Similarly with government intervention to prevent GameStop such situations, will that make us better off? I'm very skeptical. Yeah, I have another talk on how I became a libertarian, which addresses this. Yes, go ahead, Henry.
Jason Wang, you've been waiting patiently.
Jason, where are you?
Oh, hold it. I thought I clicked the unmute, okay, but maybe not. Let's give it another try.
Hi, Professor. Can you hear me now?
Hi, Jason.
Hi. So you talk about public goods like energy, like roads, and I think that you make great points. I just wanted to know, a lot of these, these industries have high barriers to entry, and how how this would affect competition, and again, how this would affect prices. Oh,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I said, there are lots of problems in the real world, and many of them are created by government. So most barriers to entry in most industries are government created. Okay, and they're not a bug, they're a feature. It's lobbying by the industry to prevent others from competing, okay, to erect those barriers to entry. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I'm against barriers to entry. We're reading a book that says competition in the product markets is kind of the key to economic development and growth. But government historically has been a creator of barriers to entry, not an agent that removed barriers to entry. It's very hard for private companies to set up barriers to entry. Okay, the government has the use of coercion. Okay, coercion is a big help if you want to block people from entering. And so it's outsourced to the government if you want to do it. And the politicians get nice campaign contributions. Yes.
I see. Thank you.
Here we have an audience question wondering which parts, if you have an opinion about this one, which parts of the recent stimulus actions by the government, I'm assuming that refers to the COVID-19, the CARES Act, the original CARES Act last May, I believe it was, or June, and then the subsequent stimulus efforts at the end of the Trump administration, 900 billion, I believe it was, and perhaps also the proposed 1.9 trillion in Biden's stimulus package. A listener wants to know whether you have an opinion about which, if any, of those three actions by the federal government seems well advised.
I'm very skeptical. I think it's really a lot of pork barrel. It's sort of, you know, politicians handing out goodies in the hope of getting contributions and votes. There was someone, I think, in the Obama administration who said, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. Okay, so it's just taking advantage of the crisis. Like one of the things in this 1.9 trillion, there's a lot of money going to bail out state pension funds for public sector unions. What has that got to do with COVID exactly? Well, but that's very much in the interest of the Democratic Party. Those are big supporters of the Democratic Party. So it's just full of stuff like that. Is it a good idea just to hand out money to people to stimulate demand? I'm very skeptical. It hasn't stimulated demand generally. I mean, there's been a big increase in savings. If you look at the statistics, people save all this money. They don't spend it. So I don't think it's been, I mean, the macroeconomics of it, I don't think is sound, and I don't think that's what it's about. It's just that all bets are off because it's a crisis. We can do anything we want. And all the things, all our wish list, all the things we've been wanting to do for years, we can sneak them in now and no one will notice. We'll do a lot of, you know, free money for everyone to give it a cover. And then we'll, you know, the 1.9 trillion, I don't know what the proportions are. We'll do $1 trillion, which looks like it has something to do with COVID. And then we'll sneak in all these other things that we wanted to rob the public purse for. And that's what it looks like to me.
Thank you. Harold then. Harold, you're next. Welcome.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, so my question is, in my class on the history of economy, we learned about the Bengal famine of 1943.
I'm not hearing.
Would you consider that a market failure?
Harold, I'm not hearing you.
The Bengal.
Speak slowly.
Hello, can you hear me now?
That's good.
Yes. Yes. So would you consider the Bengal famine of 1943 a market failure because the people were more interested in exporting food than actually feeding the local people and leading to millions of deaths?
I'm not familiar with the Bengal famine, but I know there's some famous economist who said there's really never been a famine that wasn't a result of government policies. So I don't know what the British policies were that brought that about, but I'm very suspicious that it was not sort of a free market situation.
Thank you.
I have a saying that unfortunately I have used for very often, and that is that there is no crisis so bad that the government can't make it worse. And we see the evidence of that last year. And I bet, without knowing anything about it, there really was a problem with the Bengal famine, but I'm sure it was made much worse by the
Arun, you're next.
Hi, Arun.
Professor Kohn. Yeah, so my question is, how can the government resist calls from interest groups or other public interests to intervene in the markets?
It doesn't want to. It's not a bug, it's a feature. That's the service they provide. That's what they do for a living, okay? And they do very well from it.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I can't be more optimistic. Yeah.
Theodore is next on the
Okay,
list.
yes. Teddy, how are you?
Hi, Professor Kohn. So there's been recently a lot of like negative sentiment about the public stock market and how it's not aligned with the state of our nation today. And there's been call for control of it because it's not aligned with the everyday working person, and especially the lower class. And to what point do you think, or to what extent has the massive government stimulus, do you think, fueled this supposed like cryptocurrency and stock market bubble?
I really don't know. I mean, I think there's been a big expansion of the money supply in the last year, almost unprecedented in a single year, certainly since World War II. And it's not unusual when this happens that you have real big sort of bubbles in asset prices of all different kinds of assets. So people get this windfall, and some of them want to gamble on GameStop with it, and on other things. So I mean, I have read things that argue that it's not entirely a coincidence, all these things, that it is related to the public largesse.
Thank you.
Meir, we have another question from the audience, and the question is this.
Yes.
Can you think of a better alternative to the 1.9 trillion stimulus? And do you think that the market is equipped to handle such failures without any government intervention, given the fact that markets themselves are regulated, after all?
I have, when people ask me what should we do, again, I have a standard response that I don't do medicine, I do autopsies. I don't know. I don't know the answers. I'm sorry. I can tell you why some of the things that are being suggested don't make a lot of sense to me, but I can't come up with good suggestions that will solve the problem. Or with Tom Sowell, I don't think there are solutions. There are just trade-offs. I mean, we could do things somewhat better than we're doing them now, and I think I have some good ideas about which direction we should move. Sensible people talking about monetary policy have ideas about what the Fed should be doing, sort of targeting nominal GDP growth, which is not what they've been doing. James Chartouni could clue us in on all this. He knows much more about it than I do. But yeah, no, I don't think that it's impossible to do better than we've been doing. But I don't think there are strong incentives for the politicians to do that. They're doing great. This may be hard on a lot of people, but it isn't hard on the politicians. This is, Christmas, and, this is fabulous.
We have time for one more question. Nicholas, you're up.
Okay.
Hi, Professor. Thank you for the talk. I was just wondering, what do you, so looking at the government as kind of like an insurance company, kind of like what they did with COVID, helping out businesses that failed. And what do you see the government's role, like kind of as this insurance company? Because, sometimes like you can say the bailout is justified, but if they just bail everyone out, because it wouldn't be reasonable to expect companies to prepare for like a pandemic or like a meteor hitting or something. But there are some risks that you do expect companies to prepare for, right? So I guess what do you see as like the government's role in like this?
Complicated question. The insurance thing, I think it's been vastly overdone. I think making some credit available, limited, probably not a bad thing. But I don't think, first of all, the government has made the situation much worse with this, or not the government, governments, state governments have made things much worse with the lockdowns. States that didn't do the lockdowns had about the same COVID performance without destroying their economies. So it's not as though the economic devastation had nothing to do with government. Again, this is local, it's a state government, it's not the federal government. And yeah, you could make a case that some sort of help, is not a bad idea. But bailing people out isn't really the solution. Things have to change. The world has changed. And generally, commercial economies, free market economies adjust to these changes much better when they're left alone to adjust. So it's not clear that government intervention will help, even when it's well-meaning and looks like, yeah, of course it'll help. No, not that simple. It's hard to know what will help. Okay, and things are pretty good at sorting themselves out by themselves.
Thanks to all of you for your attendance and for your lively engagement. And thanks to Meir also for being with us and for a wonderful talk and a wonderful Q&A. Wonderful to see you this evening. One last note, just for those of you who came in late, we will have our final winter term public event next Tuesday. That will be Corey Smith talking about the political economy of land use in the American West and the development of the American West. You can find out more about it on our website. And I hope to see some of you next week as well. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Good night.